Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Brian Chamberlain. I'm the CEO of the Chamberlain Group of companies. We're composed of project managers, architects, and builders or constructors. And we're kind of an unusual organization in that we started off as an architectural firm and then grew into the other two disciplines of construction and property management. And that was basically a result of my philosophy that things in the design and construction industry were upside down. That it seemed that construction was leading design when in fact design is the driver of everything that you do pretty well in the approvals and construction industry. And every time you make a dollar decision, every time you make a design decision, you just made a dollar decision of whether you like it or not. So we don't believe in adversarial relationships. We believe in collaborative relationships where we have the owner, project manager, architect, and builder all working together from the outset of the project. That is to say, right at the beginning, we bring our estimators and construction managers on the team to work with our architects so that we can test design decisions against real-world construction costs. This session was, I think, called construction and planning, and maybe that's a little bit reversed. Maybe it should be planning and construction. But I'd like to shift the focus a little bit maybe today and add what in the US they call entitlement, and in Canada we call approvals. And perhaps we should call it planning, approvals, and construction. So we've got a diverse panel with us here today. We have community consultation, we have a lawyer, we have a municipal councillor, and an architect. So I'm going to just ask you gentlemen to perhaps give us a little background on yourselves and your companies.
Great. Well, I'll start off. My name's Calvin Lantz. I'm a partner with Stikeman, Elliott. I specialize in municipal law and land use development, certified specialist with the Law Society of Upper Canada. And I've been doing development work in Ontario exclusively for at least 15 years. Acting for a number of residential developers, large-scale, small-scale, commercial developers, really doing anything that's required to get a shovel in the ground. So that's largely what I've been doing, and hopefully having some success at that. And today, I'm going to be speaking about the issue of developing apartments in Ontario. So I'm going to try to focus my comments just in terms of the apartment versus the condominium development context.
Hi everyone, my name is Garnett. I'm with a company called Abingdon Research. We do community consultation work for developers. My background's in sort of capital P politics, and we help developers especially navigate contentious situations or potentially contentious situations. Hopefully, if we start early enough, we keep them from becoming contentious by engaging the community more effectively and using that information to persuade decision makers, especially elected officials, to support a project. So we've got a specific method to do that, and I look forward to showing you some slides from a recent project we did that'll give you a bit of a sense of how that works.
And then after that, I'll let you know if I'm convinced. My name is John Taylor. I'm a regional councillor for the town of Newmarket, so I sit on the York Region Council. I chair planning and economic development at the region, and I'm also the co-chair of the Human Services Planning Board of York Region, which has been doing a considerable amount of work for the last year and a half on the issue of rental housing and the need for rental housing, and we have a bit of a campaign we call Make Rental Happen. And my background before that was in education and in business. I ran a business. I also have my background in education, a master's and a doctorate in that field as well. And want to speak a little bit today about some of the work we're doing around rental housing.
Right, and my name is Henry Burstyn. I'm a senior principal at Page & Steele IBI Group. Page & Steele's is a company that's been around or founded in 1926, and now we're in our third generation of leadership in the company. We're also part of IBI Group, who has about 26 offices worldwide and quite a number of offices throughout Canada that specializes in a little bit more multidisciplinary support to projects. Page and Steele, we essentially specialize in mixed-use projects, whether that's office, hospitality, retail, and of course how those could integrate with residential buildings. We've done a number of rental buildings throughout the city and have experience with the full gamut of quality, anything from luxury, high-end furnished apartments to middle-range rental buildings, seniors-oriented or seniors' residences, all the way to affordable housing.
Thank you, Henry. So I think I'll start off by asking some specific questions, and while I might direct those questions to one of the panel, feel free to just...
There was a presentation, no?
Sorry?
Isn't there not a PowerPoint presentation at the beginning?
Not for me.
Oh, sorry. I thought I was leading up with the presentation.
Well, Derek didn't tell me that. However, let's do that second, and let me get into some questions basically on the approval. One of the things, the reason I kind of inserted approvals in here in the topic was that talking to my team and talking to our clients, the entire entitlement and approval process has become very, very complex. There's an extreme number of departments that have to be dealt with. There's an extreme number of studies that have to be done in order to get a particular project through the site plan approval process, as we call it in Ontario, or the development permit, as they call it out west. So I noticed that there was a lot of people here for the wood construction panel, and I'm not sure exactly why that was. I suspect maybe it was money, that people saw that 15% or whatever the real number is, savings in construction as being a real way to make sure that your project gets built and succeeds from a profitability standpoint. But I'd like you to think about one other thing, and that's the high cost of approvals. And I'm not talking about just the approvals per se. I'm talking about acquiring the land, holding the land, paying various consultants to go through the process, and finally getting there. And then, of course, let's not forget the development charges. And the development charges, depending where you are, if you're in Bracebridge, Ontario, probably not a significant issue. But if you're in an urban municipality, a significant issue that can be $30, $60 a square foot. So I think it's important that you focus on the construction for costs, but I think you also have to look at that soft cost side, because it's quite significant these days. So let's start off with some questions for Calvin. And when you're going through the planning process, do you see a big difference between apartment and condominium process?
Well, I'd say, Brian, speaking as a development lawyer, I can definitely say it depends.
You can definitely say that.
I know, definitely. That'll be my answer for all the questions. Yeah. Really, there is no distinction. When you're going through the planning approval process in any municipality, you should not see any difference when you're proposing an apartment built form or a condominium built form. As you know, the distinction between the two is just one of tenure. The built form, an apartment form, a condominium form, is made up of apartment units, and they all have impacts on the existing infrastructure, the amenities in the area, traffic flow, etc. So when you go through the approval process, the impacts on the community are assessed the same way as a whole, whether it's a condominium or an apartment building. I mean, that's what I found.
Yeah.
Now that's speaking largely in terms of the Toronto context. It would also depend on the particular municipality you're looking at. There may be some local policies that may streamline or expedite approvals for apartments versus condominium. But we don't see that really in Toronto.
And maybe this is a question for both you and John. Do you see the desire to build rental apartments, assuming, of course, there is one, on behalf of the municipalities? Do you see that there would be any incentives to developers in that regard, either from the municipality or some other source?
To start with, what I'd say is that I actually believe you should experience, maybe not technically different, but you should experience a different approval process, in my opinion, if you're in for a rental versus condo. Right. And I think that the example I can give is that recently in York Region, as part of the work of the Human Services Planning Board, which is trying to address the shortage of rental in, particularly in York Region, but it's GTA wide, and it's different in different areas. But York Region's about a 1.6% vacancy rate. Some areas of the region, the area I'm in, is about 0.9%. We'd like to see something closer to 3%. I'm not sure everybody would want to see that, but that's what we'd like to see. So one of the things we did actually was somewhat informally, but one of the recommendations, and then I brought as the rep on the board to the council, was to push for, and we enacted it immediately almost, and I believe that the builder is here today, but we put in place a protocol that just simply said, if anyone showed interest in building a significant rental development, that we would instantly bring together a senior level, and I'm talking about the CAO of the region, the chair of the region, so high-level political and staff representatives to meet with and walk through what we can do to move this as quickly as possible to expedite in different ways. It wasn't a formal but more of an informal process, so I think a different experience. So yeah, and to your second question, definitely we're looking at models all over the place, the STIR program in Vancouver and different programs in Melbourne, Australia, et cetera, to try to inform us what can be done, because we're still early in understanding what other mechanisms are the appropriate net mechanisms, but we did put in place a pilot project, both supported by the town of Newmarket and the region, in which we, for this first major project in 20 years in the region, where we deferred development charges for a considerable period of time.
And so there's no particular tax breaks or grants. What you're talking about right now is development charges deferred for 5 years?
3 to 5.
3 to 5 years?
Yeah, this is in the case where we're looking at other options and other instruments. I mean, but we saw an opportunity earlier and wanted to try to move it forward. So and there were some other aspects to that incentivification. So when you're talking about having a different approval process for rental versus condominium, I'm assuming you're hoping that the approval for rental will be shorter period of time, which speaks to my earlier comments about the approval process, just in terms of retaining that land unless you happen to be independently wealthy and don't have a loan or whatever, although you should always pay yourself some interest. The shorter you can make that process, obviously, the better off we are. I understand that the housing policies in Ontario, is it, Calvin, that is undergoing a review right now?
Yeah, the Planning Act requires that every 5 years the municipalities review their official plan policies. And the City of Toronto is currently going through that process. Every municipality in Ontario is required by statute to do that. And the City of Toronto has been going through their various policies, essentially chapter by chapter. They've come out with heritage policies. They've recently come out with employment land policies. The housing policies are coming down the tube next, and we expect to see drafts of those later in this year. Now, those policies are important because it's in the context of those policies you see language around affordable housing and language around rental housing. And just recently, the provincial government has come out with a new provincial policy statement, and it also emphasized the need for affordable housing. It doesn't use the word rental, but all forms of housing, encouraging affordable housing, and rental being one of those forms. And so we know at the high level, provincial level, they're encouraging all forms of affordable housing. At the municipal level, the existing official plan policies encourage affordable housing. and have policies protecting the conversion or demolition of rental housing. But that's an area where there may need to be some further input and review. And as a landowner or a developer who wants to make better use of a site, an underutilized site, or a site that has some excess lands that could be developed, it would be important to get involved in that 5-year review process, look at those policies, and look at what policy changes may be recommended, and to make comment then and try to influence the outcome of those new policies coming forward in the municipality. And in the case of Toronto, that's happening this year. And by coming out and making your comments known, you're also going to be preserving your appeal rights to the Ontario Municipal Board. Because if you fail to get involved in this public process, you're going to prevent yourself from being at the table when it goes to the municipal board, where you can bring forward some expert evidence on the point. But right now, there are policies in place protecting rental housing, preventing the demolition, and preventing the conversion of rental to condominium. And it's quite onerous, and I think there's room for changes there to create some flexibility to encourage the development of rental housing.
Just off topic a little bit, but I think there might be a little bit of confusion about what is defined as affordable housing. Can you both comment on that, perhaps?
Well, I can say affordable housing is, depending on how it's defined, and in the case of Toronto, it refers to the mid-market rent levels. So in Toronto, you look at what CMHC projects or identifies as being the mid rate of rent for a particular city, and they break it down area by area, city by city. So there is that reference in the official plan to a mid-level rent, and anything below that is considered affordable. And that changes from year to year, and it's based on CMHC, area to area, year to year, based on CMHC surveys.
Henry, have you had any clients approach you and say, I want to design affordable housing? Has that statement ever been made?
Well, what we've had is projects that have applied for affordable housing grants.
Right.
And there's a lot of competition to get them. But what happens is they get funding from the municipality or the city. Some of it's fairly lucrative, $120,000, $150,000 a unit. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that they have to guarantee a market rent or 80% of market rent for a period of 20 to 25 years. It also means they're going to get involved in, like the city is going to set other standards. They're going to set standards for in environmental and energy, like a LEED building. They're probably going to set standards for, handicap or more accessible units. They'll may even have standards that relate back to the size of the units that may even be larger than some of the units that are actually on the market now. So we haven't had anybody come out and say that. What ends up happening is they have rental buildings that they look for advantages on, and they try to target those grants as they come along.
Yeah, just to quickly jump in there, I think there is a lot of confusion around affordable, and even in the conversation here is subsidized, somewhat subsidized housing, affordable housing. I always say I'm not sure we should call it affordable housing, or I think we should maybe call it more affordable housing.
There's no such thing as affordable housing.
Affordable for everyone is simply impossible. So I think York Region has embedded in its official plan a 60th percentile mark, and right now that's reflective of about I think $417,000 for ownership and about $1,000.67 for rental, and there's requirements for a certain percentage of a development, 35% in intensified areas or corridors, 25% otherwise. Then there's other options. But I think for rental builders, I think hopefully what we're going to see more and more is other kinds of options, whether it's what was just discussed here or partnering with regions to engage in rent supplements or other kinds of tweaking that could allow a range of affordability within one development, which could also simultaneously incentivize the building of rental.
Good, thanks. Okay, then we do have 2 slide presentations, and I think we're going to do And the reason I'd like to do that is that Garnett deals with community consultation with the stakeholders. And at one time in the dim past, you used to walk into the municipality to get your building permit. That was the big deal, and you used to shiver if it was going to take you 4 weeks or 8 weeks to get that. Well, that's the easy part now. Now it's the site plan approval process, the stakeholders' input, and your stakeholders are no longer just your client, your renters, your customers. It basically can be anyone in the community, because the public participation process is alive and well, and it'll continue to do so. So, Garnett, if you could give us your slide presentation, I'd appreciate that.
Come up there.
Sure. Not sure, is that the little gizmo that you need, or is Jay going to run it from back there? I'm not sure.
I'll try and use the clicker and see if it works.
All right.
All right, so I spoke as part of a panel yesterday, and what I'm going to show you here is more and different information, but I do want to just quickly review kind of what I do. What we find is that in the process of community engagement, the traditional method of going to a few stakeholders, talking to people, a small group of people at an open house, doesn't really work very well, because the group of people who tend to come out to an open house tend to be self-selecting, tend to have a particular reason to be there, more likely than not tend to be very anti-development, right? The average person is somewhere between neutral and moderately positive on most types of development, but also is busy, has kids, doesn't want to take out a babysitter to go to an open house and say, yeah, looks good. So what we found a more effective way of getting information about community opinion and engaging the community is that we identify the affected area around the project, and we do a telephone survey. We identify all the phone numbers within that affected area. We call every number, usually about 5 times. And we get some good data back about how people actually perceive the development, how they feel about possible amenities and those sorts of things. We get all kinds of great information, and then we can present that information to the councillors. We can present it back to the community and say, look, this is what people are looking for. Here's what we've done to recognize that and accommodate that. We think that this project is a good project. It fits with what the community wants and needs. And that way it's very difficult then for people to come back and say, well, I represent the community and I think this. You can say, well, no, you represent a certain percentage of the community, but we've done the data, we know where the community stands, and we're responding to it. I've got the slides from a project we did in Edmonton for a guy named Greg Christensen with Christensen Developments. He was the president of the Canadian Home Builders Association, so a real thought leader in development, and someone we're very honored to have the chance to work with, and we're now kind of started on our second project with him. This is what Christensen Developments does generally is seniors communities, and to be clear, it's major redevelopment in pre-existing communities. So this isn't easy stuff from a community perspective. This is major changes to long existing neighborhoods. But they've been able to build a very good reputation by being proactive, by talking to communities, and by responding to what they want to say. So the first slide I want to just show you is a map of the consultation we did. So the star identifies the site where the redevelopment is happening. This is the Westmount area of Edmonton, for those of you who know Edmonton. And we wanted to cast a fairly wide net around the project. You wouldn't necessarily have had to go that wide, but we pulled 6,000 phone numbers from the surrounding area, and we've identified the response rates. Now, we made 3 attempts at each number. So if we'd gone up to 5 attempts, we would have gotten a higher response rate. But this is still a pretty good response rate for a phone survey. It's a much higher response rate for the most part than you would get if you were just asking people questions about politics or something more impersonal. There's a project coming in close to where you live. We want to have your input about it. So we've got a fairly large number of people responding and giving us information about their perceptions around this major redevelopment. And these are slides with permission taken directly from the results deck that we presented to Christensen Developments. So we asked, the concept was there was a major redevelopment of a mall associated with the construction of a big new retirement facility. And we explained the concept, and we asked people if they thought this was something that was needed in their community. And as you can see, the results were very, very positive. We segmented the respondents. Typically, those in the 45 and up category are looking more at seniors housing, not necessarily for themselves, initially for their parents, but then eventually for themselves. So we had some separate questions for each of those different demographics. Overall, very high number of people thinking it's needed, and even in the 44 and younger, a pretty strong majority of people saying yes, these kinds of this new retirement facility is needed in our community. See the red band at the top, the 9%. That's what we call open house goers. The rest of the people, not so much. But there's strong support in this community, clearly, for this major infill redevelopment project. And that's good news. It makes it fairly easy for them to go ahead. We did something a little bit different with this. Because for seniors housing, people are often interested in moving into seniors housing within their community or in referring their parents to come live near them. We asked some marketing questions. We thought, well, we're getting people on the phone. We might as well ask some questions that are going to be useful in the lease-up process. So we asked her, would you be likely to want to move into the facility yourself or refer a family member? And lots of people who responded to the survey expressed interest in that, and subsequently Christensen Developments got quite a few calls from people that had heard about the facility through the survey and were interested in potentially moving into it once it was built. So we asked about some of the amenities that were going to be there. I think it's always valuable when you're doing a community consultation to ask people about amenities, about the kinds of amenities they want. Because if you can sell a project in terms of amenities, yes, it's increased densification, but it's going to bring a pharmacy, a grocery store, whatever it is, into your community. That can often be a very positive thing. And if you ask about the kind of amenities that people want, then you can seek to attract a commercial tenant that really fits in with what the community is demanding. And it makes it much easier to get through that rezoning process. So we looked at some different amenities people were interested in. Most of the amenities people were interested in. We made an important discovery here, particularly on the chapel and English pub question. We broke results out based on demographics, and we were able to confirm that women are disproportionately more interested in the chapel, men are disproportionately more interested in the pub. So that will surprise some of you maybe, but this is what you can find out by doing good quantitative research. Now, this is really important, I think. Again, keeping in mind the kind of environment that Christensen operates in, typically you wouldn't think of infill developer as being a good thing, right? I mean, it would be at about the level of lawyer, maybe, in the public mind. But 80% of about 80% of people who have heard of Christensen Developments have a positive impression of the company. And it's because they are actively engaged in the community in a lot of different ways, but one of those areas is community consultation. They're interested in being proactive and talking to the community and finding out what they think. And you know, you can get there too, right? If you're proactive with the community and you're talking to ordinary people and you're not just mired in conversations with community leaders who are hostile to development, but you're engaging with the population, you're doing what they want, you can have a very positive response. What we find is even asking the question, even going out and conducting a survey like this on behalf of a developer gives people a really good feeling about the developer. It makes them believe that the developer really cares about what they want for their community. And then with all our surveys, we'll ask people if they want to be kept informed about the development. So we've got some information here just on the number of people who expressed interest in continuing to be informed. So about 200 people overall. This is from the two different streams of the survey. This is the 45 and over. This is the 44 and younger. So a lot of people interested in continuing to receive information about the development. For the most part, with an interest in potentially moving in or referring a family member. So community engagement aside, just from a marketing perspective, this was a very worthwhile and cost-effective exercise based on the number of leads we were able to generate for them. But in addition, they got this great information that they can then send to people on City Council, that they can send to the Mayor, that they can use with community stakeholders to say, we're listening, we're responding to what the community wants, and we're providing back a product that serves the interests of the community. So that just sort of summarizes what we have to offer and gives you a sense of what our reports would look like. I think this is a really valuable tool for you to use, and it's certainly much more effective than the traditional method. So thanks.
Just an additional question in that regard. I think we've all been in a situation where you show up at council meetings in a municipality and the vocal minority shows up, and there's a real danger that because those people are making a lot of noise and the only people that seem to be interested in showing up, that council will give more weight to that particular group than to the community at large. And as you said earlier, in many cases they could represent like 1/2 of 1%. Can you comment on that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, politicians are interested in re-election.
You're not going to insult him after you insult
No,
the
no. Yeah, I don't have a good joke about architects either.
Right,
But but politicians are, I think, legitimately interested in re-election. Those that are not don't get re-elected. So they tend to be quite interested in data as well and understanding where public opinion is at. So if I'm an elected official and I don't have any polling data, but I know the 5 people in front of me are very opposed to a project, and there's nobody who's supportive of it in front of me in that situation, then I may draw the conclusion that the community is against the project.
Right.
If, on the other hand, someone has given me some good quantitative polling data that shows what community opinion is, then it doesn't matter how many people call my office say they're opposed to it, because I know what the numbers are. I know that reliably the community is in favor of it.
Right. Can I just add a quick thought there?
Sure.
The one thing I would say is that, contrary to popular perception, is all elected officials are not idiots. And
Come on,
Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Well, and the one thing I would warn though is, well, I actually think what you're proposing here in the direction you're proposing is excellent, because often we'd like to have a better understanding of what's beyond the room. But I would warn you, I would be sitting there going, okay, I'd like to know a little bit more about this data, and I'd like to understand it more. Just as one example, you said, well, we described the project and then we asked people what they think. Well, I've got a bit of a background in research. I'd like to hear what that description was like.
Yeah.
Because I can describe a project in many ways. And so you know what I really want is reliable, I want the most independent data you can give me, and it's actually, if the project's a good project, it's more helpful to the proposal that it's as unbiased as possible, so that we're getting as clean data as possible and as good a read as on the community as possible. And I'm not suggesting you would do that, but the concern there is how statistically relevant is the data if there was a description or a conversation in advance that packaged it. And so I just want really good, independent, clean data. Yeah,
John, that's an excellent point. I definitely agree with that. I mean, whenever we will present this information, we'll provide the questions we use, and it's not good for anyone, for the client especially, to have skewered data. The approach we often take, though, when we're asking these kinds of questions is there's a progression, right? So you start out with some really neutral, fair, take the temperature type questions, so that you're getting clear data there, and then later on in the survey you can ask questions, given this factor about the project, what do you think now, sort of thing. So you still have that totally untainted initial questions, but you have those later questions, so you can see, because you want to understand the impacts of different arguments. You ask people what they think based on what they know, and then you introduce other information and you see how that additional information affects their perceptions of the project. So I think you can do both. For the Christensen Developments project, for instance, we didn't tell them who the proponent was till the end of the survey. We asked a series of questions about the redevelopment, and then at the end we said, by the way, this is a Christensen Developments project. What do you think of the company? So there are different ways of doing that, and yeah, using a credible research company like ours is very important for that.
And I'll leave it here, but I assume you can also provide the data broken down by geography, because 6,000 is great, but maybe they're so far afield they don't care.
Absolutely.
So you can give it to us by within certain ranges of.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll like a lot of research companies, we would break that out based on demographics. If it was relevant, we can break it out based on psychographics as well, based on location, based on political party support if it matters. Those demographic questions are important as well.
Thank you. Just before we get into Henry's slides, Just, well, I guess the two architects here have to have something to say. And for any of you architects in the audience, more and more we're finding too that municipalities and the stakeholders, they want to see exactly what it is that's going to be built in their community. And this is where the architects here can really help out, because the days of just dealing with a zoning bylaw that says it's going to be 20 stories high, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it's got so many cars, they're gone, they're behind us. And it's a legitimate concern, because as we know, you can describe a project physically with its attributes, but the aesthetics of that project and the urban design guidelines of that project can be totally different. So it's very, very important that as architects, that you work with your client closely to really give the community a sense of what's going to move into the community, because a lot of the times it's just fear. If they don't know, it's fear of the unknown. If they don't know what's coming, if they can see a real three-dimensional Revit building information model that clearly shows them what's coming, then I think it makes everybody's job easier. So with that, Henry, let's move on.
Can I touch on that as well? We've
Yeah, sure.
actually even had some developers go so far as to approach the community first, seek out the resident groups or the heads of the associations, bring them, have individual meetings with those people, adjacent neighbors, find out what's very important to them, and almost what you could call it kind of reverse engineer those into the building, and have a discussion about the building prior to even the public, the mandatory public meetings, so that we can feather out a lot of the concerns. And actually, we're doing a little bit of the jobs of the planners, and obviously giving the councillor a little bit more, I guess, support, in the sense that the community was engaged through the process. And ideally, and a lot of times it does end up with a better project. I mean, you're not going to fetter out everybody who's against your project, but certainly it brings a lot of weight to a meeting if you have support from residents associations for your project.
Good. Do you want to come up here for your slide?
Yes,
or?
please.
Yeah.
Just like to echo that comment. We've found that a lot of times developers will come in and they want to just meet the minimum requirements for notice, for public notice, for statutory public meetings, and they really come at it trying to minimize the level of engagement with the community. And what we found on some of the larger, more complex development applications being put forward by more sophisticated developers is just the opposite. They reach out to the community first. They're proactive. They find out who are the kind of the movers and shakers in that community, who are the ratepayer groups, and we meet with them. In one case, we met with a community in advance of submitting in the application, and we said we wanted to meet with you to show you what we have. And we came into a boardroom, and there were about 10 members of the local ratepayer group there, and we rolled out the paper, and they were blank. The papers are blank, and we said, okay, now let's hear your ideas. and so we engaged in a process of getting ideas from them, and they were principled ideas, high-level ideas in terms, not details of design, but principles. If they're concerned about height, well, what is it about the height? It's the shadows. Well, any shadows? No, it's the shadows on the park. And so we managed to design a building that kept the shadows off the park, but at the same time maximized the yield on the site. In one case, we had to eliminate shadows on a park, and because that was the critical piece, and it meant losing a floor off the building. So instead of removing a floor, we reduced the height of each floor by about this much. And that collectively took the shadow off the park, and we retained the floor. So you can take these creative approaches, but I'm an absolute advocate of reaching out to the community first, and not simply meeting the minimum consultation requirements in the Planning Act.
Yeah, we all know that Ontario Building Code is meant to be minimum requirement. You're not talking about the code, of course, but it applies to all sorts of rules, doesn't it? Henry, why don't you take it away?
Just the green button?
I have no idea.
Okay. So I was asked to speak a little bit about what are the differences in construction costs between a condominium and a rental. And when you first look at the two, is there any real distinction between a rental building and a condo from a code perspective? No, there isn't. They both have the same building science issues. They both have the same life safety issues. So there's no real distinction there. There's any number of construction methods. I mean, you've gone through quite a few presentations where you can go anywhere from low-rise to high-rise. Low-rise certainly going to give you more opportunities for different building types. But a lot of the construction is somewhat based on the trades that are available in locals. Toronto hasn't been an issue because we have a pretty robust development industry, but outside of Toronto it gets a little bit more pronounced. Out west we've been doing low-rise buildings that are steel construction, Hambro, but in Toronto it really hasn't, we haven't seen a lot of that because of really the land costs, and if a developer is going to be moving forward with a project, they want to see more than 6 stories. So the real difference, I guess, is that you're going to be owning the building yourself, and what do you want to reinvest in the building? One strategy over another. What you really have to think about is what's appropriate for the site, who are you going to be competing against, what's the level of quality that you're going to be stating for your project, who's the target market. And once you establish those criteria, then you can kind of make a decision about the different menu items that are available to you, which may skew you in advantage for economics with a rental over a condo. That said, there's a lot of high-end rentals, and there could be a lot of arguments made where rentals are at a higher quality than condos, especially with the lead that's being provided on those buildings. So everything that I tell you here, it's really more of a set of menu items, and they're not exclusive to apartment buildings, but there are some advantages that you may be able to use. So the first thing that we see is probably site selection. We know that condos generally need to go on an A site. Certainly rentals can, but rentals can also find themselves on B or C sites, quirkier sites, sites that may have established rental a community, but maybe not be a condo, be ready for condos. So this is one site, for instance, in Ajax that we're working on. It's called the Vision at Pat Bailey Square. This is a project where we're looking at basically revitalizing or creating a new downtown for Ajax. And one of the main advantages that the city saw in moving forward, it's not in partnership, but in many ways it is, with Medallion on this one, was the fact that the 2 rental buildings weren't tied to the market, and there was an assurity that they would come into place in a time frame that would allow them to build their civic center and their new public square within, I guess, maybe the mayoral campaign. What you see here is really, again, a comprehensive site. So if you have a site that maybe isn't an A site, there's no reason you can't turn it into an A site. If you have a large enough site, we've done here, you have amenities where you've got a skating rink, you're going to have a outdoor area with stages, farmers markets. So there's lots of amenities that are going to be provided on this site. And it's helping revitalize the site. Immediately to the north now, a condo developer has started the next part of what's going to be the new downtown for Ajax. We've also found that in some areas like London, the east side of London, where we've got some approvals done, we're putting buildings in areas that need revitalization. That revitalization is bringing feet on the street, people into those businesses that are in dire need of some traffic. And as a result, they're getting waived DCs and other incentives on those sites for development. From an approval side, a lot of times it's, I guess, rental owners or developers have the advantage of saying that they're going to be a long-term member of the community. They are there for the long haul. They have a lot of invested in the success of the community. They're not like a condo builder who may come in, drop in, and sell a site, and then if there are problems that are created from it, they disappear. So there's a lot of advantage there. Certainly from a political and planning perspective, they are seen as favorable, seen in a favorable light. Essentially, you're getting right-leaning politicians and left-leaning politicians agreeing on the same things. One is the need for development, and the other is for providing different ways of living or allowing more affordable ways of living for different members of the community. So from an approval side, there's an opportunity for faster approval. I touched on this earlier, government grants, affordable housing programs. This was a site that we did at 475 Patricia, Bathurst and Patricia. It was originally a condo site, and it just didn't take off. It was maybe 1 or 2 years into the process of trying to sell units, and they just didn't hit the numbers that they needed. So we found out that this program was available for affordable housing, and we told the developer that maybe you should rethink the project. So they went into partnership with B'nai B'rith, and there were 30 applicants for this project. Only 6 were chosen. This was one of them. We secured another one for another client. And what it resulted in was essentially a successful project. Like I said before, $150,000 grant per unit, just to keep your market rent at 80% of market rate, which is isn't really that much of a sacrifice in this area. And it basically resurrected a project that probably should have been rental to begin with. Shorter time frame for development period and compressed marketing time. So, you're never going to get the advantage of like a rental has over a condo in terms of that. Essentially, you can go right from design development straight into production, working drawings, move forward with permits, and there's no gap in time for building a multi-million-dollar sales center with model suites. You still may have an extensive marketing program, but you don't necessarily need to have that gap to move forward with it. And then certainly there's no gap waiting for sales. There's more flexibility for a rental building or a rental product to move forward quicker. And they're not tied to some of the changes in the code, like what's happening with the barrier-free in January, where a lot of developers are being forced to go to permit before they have sales because they've sold units and they're changing the regulations on barrier-free units. These things can change on the fly. You could do your black lines after you've done all of your construction documents. And you can do a sales center in the base of your building or basically a model suite in the base of your building that you'll end up just getting occupancy earlier on. And instead of having a physical model to market your building, you have got your physical building. Will your rental be registered as a condo? A lot of talk was about having an exit strategy. We do have developers that use that as an exit strategy. They do take the condominium. They do register their rentals as condominiums. If you don't, there's some savings there. You don't have to have the condo registration fee. There are certainly no fees for lawyers, the condo docs. You don't need surveyors to verify all the sizes of your units. You don't need a tertiary and secondary oversight of all of your construction, although you may still want that. So there's some savings to be had there. In building design, again, this is a menu item depending on the level of quality that you want to provide to your buildings. Of course, you want to be economical as you can with rental buildings and not give up quality. So one of the big advantages we've seen for rentals is lower parking requirements. You can even lower than any condominium. It's a little bit less pronounced in Toronto, where they're really relaxing those requirements. But outside Toronto, you can definitely get a reduced parking ratio, which means that you have less underground. You're out of the ground quicker. That's a major expense for any building. Amenities are really a mixed bag. You can go any way on this. If you want to just have more affordable rents, then you can limit your amenity package to that. Amenities could be things like having a grocer in your ground floor that's affordable to the residents, or it could be like a retirement residence. You're essentially doing what's like a resort hotel. So that can vary quite widely across the board. Ceiling heights, we've noticed that in condos generally you want to see 9 to 10 feet for 9 at least for ceiling heights. Rental, you could probably get away with 8'6". What does that mean for your construction? That means on every 9 floors you could potentially save a whole floor of envelope. And again, quicker construction time. So there's some possibilities for savings there. Balconies, we've been doing balconies in condos now that are, outside rooms, loggias. Again, if you're moving towards a luxury, then you may want to provide the same thing. But if you're providing more of a middle range product, yeah, you may not need to do 7-foot deep balconies. You could probably get away with 5-foot balconies in a fairly decent size. You want to definitely look at some repetition in your units. You may not have the need for a lot of different building or unit types. You'd probably want to maximize your floors so you don't have as many transfers. Litigation, sure, you may not be sued on everything that you would be in a condo. I'm not sure that's necessarily an advantage, but and restricting technology to practical payback. So obviously your operating costs are going to be very important to you. So you may put some investment up front towards those lead items to bring down your operating costs. Just one more slide. In terms of the building design unit sizes, again, what they were talking about, if you can get the same rent for an 825 or an 800 unit, then surely build less. You can get the same rent and save yourself some costs. In the suburbs, you may have larger units. I mean, certainly we're seeing 3-bedroom units are doing better within rentals than condos, and certainly serving that market better. Appliances and washer dryers within suites or not within suites, whether they're roughed in or whether you've got a laundry room on the ground floor or individual washer dryers on each floor. Lockers, those again, sometimes we see those inside units so that they don't have to necessarily be in the underground. Again, reducing the underground stacks, because they're the acoustics, though, you'll get back-to-back washrooms that could share a plumbing stack right through a demising wall. And finishes, I mean, again, that all comes back to the level of quality. Everything here is really about level of quality. You probably want to provide a little bit more durable materials. So those are, in the 10 minutes that we have to talk about, that's about kind of the overview I can give you on that. And I'll be around if we want to talk about anything later on.
Good. Thanks. Okay, we don't have much time left, but so I'd like to just touch on one last topic, and that is the entitlement or approval process. Sometimes today that process can take longer than the actual construction. So my question to all of you is, what can cities, developers, architects do to shorten that timeline? Or is that impossible?
They can work faster. That's well, it's unfortunate. We see the we see delays in all municipalities. Sometimes the comment is that Toronto is particularly bad and particularly slow in terms of the approval process, but we see other types of hurdles in other municipalities. I think the strategy really is to make sure your team of consultants is organized, experienced, that they have a strategy right from the outset, and they see through how the approval process will unfold, and they anticipate that there's a risk right from the outset of an OMB hearing, and they plan for it. And when I see delays happening, it's usually because they haven't really thought through the strategy from the outset. So having the right team,
And I think
essential.
that the planning aspect of that is extremely important. You know, it used to be you'd say, okay, the construction is going to take 2 years, so let's really plan that out.
Yeah.
But you really have to start right at the beginning and plan that whole process from approvals to everything that's going to, and you have to have branches off if the OMB happens to be something that happens, because I think we're seeing more and more now that sometimes the OMB is just seen as, okay, let's refer that there because he's the bad guy. And maybe council doesn't want to get into those sensitive issues, so let's go to OMB. Which means in some cases, maybe you should just go anyhow, I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
Any other comments on that, speeding up the process?
Well, I mean, I think one thing that's kind of important is presenting a vision that people can get excited about. Contributing to the public realm. Is there some, if you have a large development, are you introducing a park, or are you introducing other services that are needed by the neighborhood? We have some projects that have daycares that are part of their projects. Essentially, if your project's large enough, you can get into what you'd almost describe as city building exercises where, we're taking like planning rationales from the 60s where you had, towers in the park and finding ways of making it safer by introducing grade-related units and those types of uses. It also somewhat depends on which municipality you're in. Certainly some areas like Toronto is certainly open for business. It's harder in other municipalities to move through the process because sometimes they're really more concentrated on numbers and FSI numbers rather than the final built form. So we would always push for good design and definitely public realm. Yeah,
my partner often says it's easy to get an approval if you have the right design, and maybe that's part of the secret. Did you have any comments particularly? No?
Just jump in on that. Yeah, I think the point about the OMB is interesting. You can speed up the process by being proactive at the beginning, by engaging the community early. I like the point made. It's not just about trying to check off the boxes. It's about using consultation in a strategic way to maximize your interests. And if you can take the temperature down, you certainly significantly reduce the chances of going to the OMB, because from a cost perspective, you're much better off doing a little bit more work on the front end and avoiding the whole OMB process. That said, if you've gone through the process of engaging the community and engaging especially project supporters, that can be advantageous for you as well as you go into an OMB situation. You know who and where your supporters are, and you've got an opportunity potentially to mobilize those people to participate in support of the project. That's an opportunity you might not otherwise have if you didn't have that kind of good list of project supporters available to you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Our time's up. Derek, I apologize. The one question I promised I would ask everybody, I don't have time to do that, about the sharing of advice they've never given to anyone before. But yeah, join me in thanking our panel, please.